Welcome to my one moment happiness video. And this is sort of a space. This is a space I'm sort of creating and designating by heaping on associations to the space. So I think of this space and I think of something else that I'd like to bring in as an association so that when I come to the space, that association springs readily to mind. And what I'd like for it to be is kind of a anything can be anything if you want it to be space. So whatever you got going on in your life, you can't change it. I'd really like for you to be able to, in this space or your own space, wherever you designate, it might be, ideally it would be something that you're doing a lot of. So let's say at work or like say being at home with your family. You'd feel a sense of a space being an utterly creative place. I mean, absolutely creative. That is, a place that's so creative, you can designate this is this or that is that. So, for example, ideally, a person with, say, chronic pain would be able to say, every time my chronic pain happens, I get super happy and get a flood of endorphins. That is, if the chronic pain is indeed unavoidable. Something like that. And keep practicing it and getting in deeper and deeper into the chronic pain until I would hope the pain itself goes away. Now, this is not dogma. This is not something that I'm saying is true and then that I'm a miracle worker, that you are, or any of that. But it is an exploration because it is possible to kind of explore and see, experiment and see, well, if we make our visit to the difficulty and experience it here and now, not in terms of what we've decided that it is or have found through expertise or our own expert experience, that it is through that irrefragable experience that there is a way of encountering something right here, right now, so as to reinvent it. Absolutely. This is something I'm just exploring, but I find that, sort of designating a space in which to do that and continuously cultivating that space as such, growing it into something better and better and more hospitable to such ways of thinking is a very exciting thing to do. It is, you might say, the ultimate respite. It's the ultimate sleeping off the tiredness. It's the ultimate rejuvenation, where all things can be possible, particularly the things that we'd like to have happen. Because, worry can make all kinds of things possible that we would not like to have happen. I'm sure you've experienced that once or twice in your life. So, just walking back to a friend's house. This is really interesting. I have news, okay? And when you look at the first video I posted, I was sort of on the verge of losing. Well, I'd kind of lost a whole lot of things, and I've tripled my income since one of the earlier videos that I made that were made not too long ago, actually, just a couple months ago. So I've tripled my income as of, let's say, the income I was making 2 years ago. And and I've also made some wonderful and interesting new connections. So there's plenty going on. One thing that I am looking to do differently is to interpret what is a much more scattered life, because I have more jobs. I have 4 jobs, whereas I had only 1 or 2 in previous years, which requires a lot of driving, and it's sort of a tenuous job that have a tenuous relationship to each other in that they are placed at different locations, as opposed to a job where it was all in the home and I could just sort of get up wearing basically nothing more than this t-shirt and a pair of shorts, and I'd be at the job. I could clock right in, and I had all kinds of amenities at my disposal immediately. I worked for somebody who was not only a friend but an employer, severely disabled, paralyzed below the neck, and I'd known him I'd known him since 1988. So it was a very, very easy job in a lot of ways. So, okay, so what I'm saying is that with all this working that I'm doing, there's a kind of a feeling of being stretched thin and a kind of tenuous. I can see a lot of weak links to this chain where something could happen with all the driving. I could get tickets, or the car could break down, so on. And these are problems that I hadn't thought of or had to deal with back when I was working at home. In fact, I was also often riding a bicycle around instead of even having to deal with a car. So I'm looking to change the meanings of this. Sort of first take in the meanings that it seems to mean to me, which are, okay, one meaning would be this is a tiring process. Two might be a wearying process, a tenuous process, or that is not a very strong multiplicity of connections, but maybe one or two connections. So a little, you have to push a little harder to get from point A to point B in a tenuous connection. And another thing would be that it is, time consuming in a way that doesn't really inspire me at this point. So given that I'm going to continue to commute between these various locations, I do have a system worked out that I think is going to be more useful to me. But overall, I'm setting an attention here within this space that I almost like this detraction, this deterrent from doing all these jobs, the time consumption of traveling and applying the same route again and again with all the stoplights and all the landmarks and so on, that my intention is that this be the most inspiring part of the whole thing. Not that the other parts of it can't catch up and surpass the inspiration later on, but I like to see an underdog win. And this right now is the underdog inspiration, that of taxing, tiring, zombie commuting. Okay? And so now, I mean, there are a number of things I personally can do to make this, to start to turn this around. One is I could write a song. I think a lot of musicians who've toured have written about the dreariness of being on the road. I can think of Bob Seger with Turn the Page, and it has that kind of deadness and sort of plodding along quality that adds to its dramatic content. And I'm sure many, many others. So that's one thing that I can do in my spare time, is just to kind of artistically represent the deadness, the dreariness, the plodding quality of this. Now, those who are non-artist types, I suppose, once one realizes that one is kind of making up the meanings that something has for one, one then can choose to make up pretty much any other meaning. And by playing it kind of loosely, one can actually start to find little crevices wherein that meaning can take root and actually grow the real thing. I'd say creating a meaning often feels like you're buying something on credit. You've got to pay later on. But so you create a meaning that may not be plausible at first. It may be outrageously implausible, in fact. That is, for example, my chronic pain means that life is excellent, exquisite, and I am blessed and benefited by all that comes my way. Okay, chronic pain normally wouldn't be a reminder of that. It would be the opposite. But through practice, I found at least, and people will have more greater and lesser extremes of pain, but I found at least with emotional pain that if it's light enough, if it's not metastasized, then I can kind of get a handle around it and begin not only to alleviate that pain, make it mean something that more inspiring and better than it had, but actually turn it into pleasure itself, as if one thing can become its opposite, and that we can have a choice in terms of what we decide to make into its opposite. This is wonderful. Can we make, for example, taking those elements of our life where money is drained, that is, having to ply a route where you pay like tolls or have to buy gas? Is there a way of doing that very same thing and actually making money from it? And so a space like this is a sort of a gestating chamber where you can kind of float a concept, float an idea, and without having to take action, without having to explain yourself immediately as to how you have an airtight plan for this implausible thing to take place. You float it, you let it sort of echo in a sustained atmosphere for a while until it starts to make sense. I would do this when I play the piano. I would just sort of, or if I played a synthesizer, I'd sound out notes. Just sound out notes. If I had a synthesizer and there was a different instrument that was unfamiliar to me, I would sound it out without feeling rushed to take further action. I might hear an A, and just, what does that A remind me of? It may remind me of something in life. It might have a certain mood to it, particularly the timbre, the texture of that instrument, and then eventually playing it over and over, it may gain a kind of traction until all that emotion, all that ambient thought and feeling would translate into further notes, into perhaps a chord, into perhaps an arpeggiated chord, and then it takes off. There is a kind of the wheels start spinning, the tires hit the road, torque and sort of favorable resistance is gathered, and then things can move in a very substantial way. So again, this is the space I'm designating to do that. I'm looking to create other spaces. I'm looking to create this space into even more of this thing. But I do want to celebrate this success already of having made 3 times the amount of money I was making only 2 years ago. And next is really, creating something positive out of the commute that is so super positive, and sort of momentum is generated from that positivity, that so much so that the commute becomes the most inspiring part of my new lifestyle. Okay, and then after that, I am working as a caregiver for parties, and there's very often a sense of non-creativity. So I'm just doing what I'm told in somebody else's way, according to their means and methods. And what about my guitar compositions? What about my piano playing? What about making paintings? Maybe getting back into acting and video editing and actually filmmaking. Wouldn't that be wonderful? So what happens with that? Is there a way of connecting this ostensibly a very much unconnected lifestyle with those dreams I've had of being an artist in multiple disciplines, and which I've sometimes followed through on, and perhaps even take from the resources of these jobs and make and even though these jobs would seem to pull me away from that life, and I've quit many jobs so that I could go back to being an artist, that these jobs could make a better vision of artistic output and success than if I were not doing these jobs and had all that freedom that supposedly an artist would need to make things. Yes, so can I have a much more freeing, substantial, credible, authentic, authoritative, artistic life because I'm helping out these blessed people, paralyzed below the neck, 2 of them, one developmentally disabled and sort of in a mental battle between himself and society, 2, and then someone who suffers from massive chronic pain and lashes out at the world from time to time as a result. Can all these things and suffering that I sometimes like a pincushion have absorbed from them, can all of this make me a far better artist than if I were not doing these very time-consuming jobs? This is an interesting proposition. I like this underdog concept that although the odds are well stacked against it, I just delight in imagining can thrive. I'm wishing for you that any part of you, or your relationship to society, or your view or assessment of other people, or your assessment of anything that you will presumably have to live with, can feel the same way, that most underdog part of your life, that part of your life that is the most painful, the most annoying, the most where you might get pompous as a kind of a compensation for the degradation of this experience. Whatever your interpretation, whatever your story is, but it involves suffering of some sort. I would like for you to be able to place that dark horse runner, that underdog, to the front of the pack for yourself, just to have the freedom of changing how you perceive reality. And I'll talk to you some other time. How about that?